Well, Stephen Guilbeault, the Minister of Environment and Climate Change here in Canada, has referred to the goal of a fully decarbonized electrical grid as a nation-building project. However, with the proposal of net zero and decarbonization, as the phrases used by our federal government are shared with Canadians, many of us are asking just how realistic and feasible are these plans? Well, to answer those questions and more, I am joined by the spokeswoman of the Friends of Science, Michelle Stirling. Michelle, welcome back to Bridge City News.
Thanks so much for having me, Michael.
It's great to have you on. So before we get into the meat and potatoes of this, can you give us like the Coles notes of Friends of Science?
Friends of Science is an organization of Earth, atmospheric, solar scientists, and business people, along with citizens. We've been operating for 21 years now. This is our 21st year. And we advocate for open civil debate on climate and energy policies and full cost benefit analysis. So we look at the peer-reviewed materials and the gray literature that's coming out and all these various reports. And then we issue commentaries on them with a critical review. And we source a lot of material also from Clintel, which is an organization of 1,500 plus scientists and scholars in Holland. And their view and ours is that there's no climate emergency. We do have time.
Right. Now, that being said, we'll circle back to Stephen Guilbeault's comments. He had said that the net zero economy is the greatest economic opportunity of our time and a nation-building project of unprecedented scale and importance. Now, when we look past the ideas and the speeches, in your opinion and from the research of your organization, how will this idea become reality?
Well, I would say that the question we have is reality versus delusion, and we wrote a report on that on the Clean Electricity Standard. If you look at the amount of fossil fuels that we use in this country, especially, or in the world, to operate our modern society, about 80% is fossil fuels. So you don't change that overnight. And, it took us 100 years to build up the infrastructure that we have. So to start dismantling it and saying, oh, you can't heat your home with natural gas anymore. Well, how long is it going to take you to change that infrastructure, either to electrical or some people say hydrogen? I don't think that's a very safe choice, but whatever it may be, that's going to take decades. It's not something that you can do overnight. And especially with regard to the electrical power grid, the grids are essentially serving each province. They're not connected. So the whole idea that the Liberal Party has had since 2005, I think, is to connect them all, kind of like Lego. They think it would be simple, because then if there's lots of wind in Alberta and there's nothing in Ontario, you can ship the power there. That's just not how electricity grids work. It's very expensive and dangerous. It put us at risk of national blackouts.
From the evidence that your organization has gathered, do these wind and solar projects that we already have in place help or hinder the people and the economy of Southern Alberta?
Well, I would say probably up to about where we were in 2000, 2013 even. We had kind of enough on the grid that it did sometimes fill in a good gap. And I spoke with a few of our retired professional engineers, and they said that they felt that it was contributing power and not putting a stress on the grid at that time. But from that point forward, what's happened when we phased out coal, we lost 1,000 megawatts over 2014 of dispatchable power. That's the kind of power that you can turn up or down. And wind and solar can't do that. They're entirely weather dependent and they're very erratic. So if you don't have that backup of dispatchable power, then you face potential blackouts. And that's a situation that we're in now. That's what happened last fall. We had 7 grid level 3 emergency alerts, which means blackouts are imminent, or they start load shedding where they may have agreements with large industrial users where they would phone them up and say, we're going to cut you off in an hour or 15 minutes or whatever it might be. That company gets paid a curtailment fee, right? From the taxpayer. So it becomes costly all the way around. The other issue is that we're actually subsidizing some of the biggest companies in the world with these power purchase agreements that Amazon and Microsoft have picked up, where it's actually Alberta and Canadian taxpayers who are subsidizing their bid to look clean and green.
Wow.
That's a hidden thing that the average person doesn't know or see.
Yeah, that sounds like there's such a web that it's hard to untangle it all. So speaking as how we're talking about the grid, can you share with us about the capacity or maybe the resiliency of Alberta's electrical grid now that we have added these variables of wind and solar?
Well, if you look in the Alberta Electric System Operator March 2023, which was the 2022 market statistic report, you can see that we have, I believe it's about 12% reserve capability, which is way down from what it was just a couple of years ago. Now, when we add on the access to the interties with Saskatchewan and Montana and British Columbia, then the reserve capability goes up to about 22% and brings us almost back to where we were a couple of years ago. But that depends on weather conditions. Like if it's really cold and dead and there's no wind in Alberta, then Saskatchewan needs to use all their coal power to fire Saskatchewan, and the same for Montana. So you have those regional weather patterns, and we might be able to draw some from BC, but again, it depends. They might need all their power. So, we can't really rely 100% on our neighbors, even though they're very good and we're grateful to them.
Yeah.
But it's lower. It's much lower now. I think the ISO says it's still manageable, but extreme weather events happen and
Right.
you don't want to be on the edge.
Exactly. Now, there's just so much to talk about, but I want to get to the recent provincial government here in Alberta of bringing out this moratorium on wind and solar projects. From your point of view, is this the best decision the UCP government can make?
Well, I don't speak for the government in any way, but I would say that it's a thoughtful one because of these blackouts that we nearly had last fall. Now, just remember that the ISO report came out in March. We were already into an election period. The election was finished, end of May, and then, setting up cabinet and everything. So it may be that only now are people realizing, wow, we seem to have a real potential technical problem here. Maybe we should hold our horses and review these projects.
Right. They don't seem to have a long lifespan. I'm certainly no expert. I've been able to read and do some research on my own. I've got to ask you, if the provincial government feels that they have to study the end of life implications and recycling potential for the components from wind and solar, this may lead one to question, are wind and solar projects actually as green as we're led to believe?
No, they're not. The neodymium mines for the big magnets that are inside the wind turbines, they're mined in China in a place called Bautu, which looks like a toxic wasteland. People there are literally dying. They have, virtually no environmental standards. And also all the solar projects, most of the top, I think it's the top 6 of 10 solar companies in Canada are Chinese companies. So, these are renewable jobs for other countries. There's another factor that's actually propped up recently, and that is that many of the wind turbine manufacturers are facing serious financial problems. One being that the cost of all the materials have gone up dramatically, and in certainly those operating in Europe, their energy costs are through the roof. So they're not viable anymore. They're losing billions of euros. That raises a question too. What happens if you put up a wind farm and then they go bankrupt? You don't have parts, you don't have warranty.
That's right. Yeah. Well, and one of the big things for businesses, of course, is cost certainty, and consumers need that as well. Now, the question's been raised, we touched on it very briefly about connecting grids from east to west across Canada. There is that thing called line loss, and there's just so much more of the backstory to me on these wind and solar projects. Do you see that there's even a path forward just here in Alberta of addressing these net zero targets?
Well, as I say, the only way that would be possible to do that is if you simply declared it free and clear if you just buy credits. So if you go to like the Darkwoods project that Nature Conservancy runs or the Great Bear Rainforest, and you buy a bunch of tree credits, all these trees are going to eat your carbon dioxide that your plant is emitting, and then you can claim your net zero. But that's just fakery. That's like paying a burglar to go and rob somebody's house down the street from you.
Yeah, so they don't rob yours.
Right.
In your opinion, what kind of budget do you think this would require to meet these targets that we're supposed to start, I guess, 12 years from now?
Well, it would be astronomical. Like, just for instance, we have to think not only about the wind and solar projects in Alberta that are on a moratorium, but just imagine the government wants us to drive EVs. So to transfer all of our light duty vehicles to EV would require another 10,000 megawatts of power generation. So the Shepherd plant in Calgary is about 800 megawatts. The Site C dam in BC it's about 1,000. So we need to build 8 or 10 more Site C dams. That's now $16 billion in costs, and it's been going on for about 30 years. Or like Muskrat Falls down east, also way over budget.
Can you talk maybe a little bit about that even home heating could be affected by this?
Well, yes, that's one of the things they want to do is to electrify homes. One of the things you mentioned is heat pumps, and people do seem to think that this is a fabulous idea. I know that Seamus O'Regan has really been pushing it down east in the Maritimes. But as you point out, it doesn't work at a low temperature, so it's perfectly unsuited to the prairies, that's for sure. And very unreliable. And if we look at the situation between Ontario and Quebec right now, excuse me, Quebec has electrified a lot of homes. They have a lot of hydro, of course, from James Bay Dam. But even in the dead of winter, Quebec has to import natural gas-fired power from Ontario to keep the lights on because they've now drawn so much power from the grid for heating homes. And they've banned other things there like wood-burning fireplaces. And the other thing I think people have to recognize is energy security is not just about having one source of supply. It's about having options. And we used to have in Alberta about 50% natural gas and 45% natural gas and 45% coal. And natural gas is a market commodity, so the price spikes are very dramatic at times. That's what's killing energy prices in Europe right now. But coal is very stable. So, if you have these options, then you can play one off against the other depending on either availability of supply or the cost of it.
Now, as we're wrapping up, how can people find out more information about the Friends of Science and maybe read some of your scholarly work?
Well, you can go to our website, which is www.friendsofscience.org. And you can also look at our YouTube channel, our Twitter feed, our blog. You'll find our blog via our website. And our reports are mostly posted on the blog. Our YouTube channel has a number of video explainers. I just did one about this very topic that we've been discussing. And you can always send us an email, media@friendsofsciencesociety.org. And media@friendsofscience.org, and I'll send you links.
Sure. That's good. Well, thank you very much. We appreciate you being here today. And thank you once again for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Our pleasure. That was Michelle Stirling. She joined us from her office near Calgary. I'm Michael Clausen. For all of us here at Bridge City News, thanks for watching.